Hey guys, I'm Danny, a friendly neighborhood colorist, and in this video we are going to be talking about the Oppenheimer grade. Well, not exactly an Oppenheimer grade, because if you've noticed while watching Oppenheimer, there's quite a lot of different grades going on. There's this very popular natural tone, and then there's also this greener tone, and there's also a darker blue tone and a desaturated blue tone, so it's all over the place. If you watch his previous movies like Tenet, it's more or less the same tones, which is leaning towards green, but it's more specific to each scene individually. So in this video, I just want to show you two types of grade. One is more towards a desaturated blue, which is kind of filmic, and the other one is more of a warm yellowish tone. So let's first analyze the scene to see what kind of colors that we are dealing with. I did a bit of digging into the behind the scenes of Oppenheimer, and most of their scenes are actually shot in natural white balance without any LED lights or anything. So the colors that you see in the final film is actually added in, something like the green tint and also the yellow highlight. So this is a scene that I've chosen as a reference for the grade that we are gonna do. So if you focus on the waveform scopes over here, and I put my qualifier on the highlights, you can see that it's a bit warmer. The reds are on a higher level, and it's not blown out. It's right below the pure white point, which is 1000 IRE. And for the shadows, it's leaning towards more of a green shadows and is floating right above 0 IRE. And for the background here, we can see that there's a slightly green and slightly yellowish tint actually. And for the mid-tone shadows range, there's a bit of blue going on over here, especially on the blackboard. You can see that there's blue. So hopefully we can push our clip to this kind of direction. Alright, so this is the clip that we are going to try to work on today. And it's not the best clip. I can't really find a clip that matches to what we are referencing one-to-one. But I think the art direction of this clip is pretty much similar to our reference. And I have my note tree already built out over here, so you can pause the video right now and copy them. Let me also pull up the reference, which is in my gallery, and I'm gonna go to a split screen view so that I can pull this up. And I'm also gonna minimize this a bit so that we have more real estate. All right. So the first thing that I always start off is with a CST. So we are going into our OFX and dragging in a color space transform. And this was shot on a red Komodo. So input color space, I'm gonna go with a red, white gamut RGB, and then red log 3G10. Output color space, I'm going Rec 709 and gamma 2.4. And for the rest of the settings, I'm just going to leave it as its default. And if you're wondering what kind of timeline color space that I'm in, I'm going into my settings, color management. I'm grading in the timeline color space of Davinci White Gamut Intermediate. And my output color space is Rec 709A because I'm on a Mac. If you're on a Windows, then you can set it to Rec 709 Gamma 2.4. With that out of the way, we can start grading. So the CST is doing a pretty good job going from a Redlock 3G10 into a Rec 709 color space so that we have a very good base to start with. So I'm going to jump straight into my primaries to do a bit of correction, which is I'm going to drop my temperature. Let's go back into our color wheels, and I'm going to drop my temperature to -200 to cool things down a bit because our reference is a little bit cool. And then going into my gain wheel, I'm going to lift it up to about 1.13 to brighten things up, and going back into the lift wheel and dragging it down just a little bit to -0.01 to add a bit of contrast in. So that's all the correction that I need to do on this clip because it was shot pretty good. This was before and after. It's looking cleaner now, a bit closer to our reference. And our next node is the bleach bypass. So if you haven't watched my previous video on bleach bypass, I recommend that you do so. I'm just going to go over it very quickly in this video because it takes quite a bit of time. So if I turn on my bleach bypass, you can see that the whole image desaturates a little bit. And let me show you what's inside. So I'm going to show compound node. So there's an adjustment node and then a desaturation node. And this is just a placeholder. And then we have a layer mixer, which I've set the composite mode to hard light. So this is what creates a bleach bypass effect. And I have set my key output gain, which is sort of like the opacity of the node, to 0.3% so that it's toned down a bit. If it's at full power, it looks very contrasty. So I don't want that, I just want 0.3. And moving on to the look node, which will be doing more of the heavy lifting for creating this look. I'm gonna go into my gamma and pull it towards the yellow. Just a little bit will do. Right there. And then I'm gonna go into my log wheels and into the shadow, and I'm gonna drag it towards the teal, which is right in the middle of blue and green, so that we can add a little bit of teal right there. So you can see that this is before, this is after. That's a lot more teal in his jacket, which is somewhat similar to our reference. Before and after. So you can see that we are kind of getting there already, but right now his skin is looking a little bit too orangey for me. So I'm going to go into my next node, which is hue, and go into my custom curves, hue versus hue, and create a point between the red and the yellow with this button over here. And I'm going to drag in the middle upwards towards somewhere like maybe 5. So you can set the hue rotate to 5, and his skin is looking a bit more reddish, which is healthier, but it's a little bit more saturated than the reference we have. So I'm gonna go into my hue versus saturation, doing the same thing, creating a point between the red and the yellow, and dragging down my orange to about 0.85, which you can see over here. So this is before and after. So that's our overall look done in 3 nodes. And next, I want to adjust my contrast using the custom curves, which is located over here. So what I like to do is to turn on editable spline. And I have a full video on this if you'd like to know more. So using the shadow point over here, I'm going to drag it up. And then it's looking a bit bright. So I'm using the spline and dragging it back down so that it creates more of a nicer contrast. Right now it's a little bit too much, so I'm going to drag back down the point and just adjust it accordingly. And I'm also, it's looking a bit dark right now, so I'm going to drag down the highlight point to right about here. And using the spline, I'm going to brighten it up to right about there. All right. I would say this is probably a good point. And the next node is our CST, which we have done earlier. And after that, what I'm going to do is a film print emulation. And it's also one of my favorite effects in Davinci Resolve because you can do it for absolutely free. So what you have to do is create a node and drag in a CST effect in your OFX panel. And then going from Rec 709 Gamma 2.4 into Rec 709 Cineon Film Log. And for the next node, you can right click on it, going to LUT and Film Looks, and select either Kodak2383 55, 60 or 65. For this clip, I'm selecting 60 because the temperature is a bit lower. If you're going for more color contrast, you can choose D55. And once you're done with that, I also have an adjustment node so that I can balance out the contrast so that these 3 nodes doesn't affect the contrast. I just want the color coming from this LUT. So what I'm going to do next is to group these 3 nodes together and create a compound node and label it as Kodak2383. So I have my compound Kodak2383 film print emulation over here, and it's looking a bit too much right now. So I'm going to go into my key output gain and drop it down to maybe 0.3. And if I turn it on and off, yeah, it's adding a little bit of blues into the shadows and it's giving me the nice contrast that you can see in our reference. So maybe I will push it up a bit. Maybe let's go with 0.5, see what's going on. Yeah, I can actually add more contrast and it looks even better. So moving on to our last node, which is our film grain. Same thing, we are going into our OFX and then dragging in film grain. So for this, I want to go with a very strong film grain texture. So what I like to choose is 16mm and 500T. If you want to view the grain itself, you can select grain only. So it's very rough. And yeah, that's about it. So let's see the final look. I can say that it's maybe 90% to the reference. It's definitely a very strong look, so it would be awesome if you can use this on a project. Alright, so let's run through all the nodes from the beginning and turn everything off. So first we started with a CST going from Redlock 3G10 into Rec 709 Gamma 2.4, and then we did a bit of corrections in the primaries to cool things down, and then we added a bleach bypass which is set to key output gain 0.3, and then we did a look which added a bit of blue into the shadows and a bit of warmth into our midtones. And we corrected his skin with the hue node with a little bit of red tint to match the reference. And this is our mixer node. And we also did a curve to add a bit of cinematic contrast to the whole grade. And then we did a Kodak2383 to push more blues and to give more contrast into the grade. And lastly, we finish off everything with a film grain. So you can also add halation into your grade, but I don't really like Davinci's halation. I usually use Dehancer, but it's quite expensive, so I don't expect everyone to use it. But if you want to get it, you can use my discount code Denigan for 10% off. So Dehancer is usually my go-to for halation, bloom, film grain, and other film emulations. But you can still get quite close to the reference without using any plugins or any OFX. So there's another clip that I want to show you, which is referenced from this, and it's a scene from Tenet. So you can see that it's more or less similar with this Tenet one. The only difference that I did here is the look, which I push a bit more yellow into the midtones, and also I push some green into the gain. So, and the other settings are basically the same. So the overall contrast and everything is more or less there already. You can just push the colors in your look node to style your grade. So that's it for this video. I hope this was useful or at least entertaining. If it was, please drop a like and I'll see you guys in the next one. Bye bye.